Good morning.
Good morning.
The reading this morning is from first chapter of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Word of God, word of life.
Thanks be to God. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel.
I invite you to be seated. The Lord be with you. Well, as you may have figured out by now, happy first Sunday of Advent. If you are panicking thinking, wait a minute, I thought Advent started 4 weeks before Christmas. Surely we are not 4 weeks before Christmas. I have a lot to get done. You are not wrong. Traditionally, Advent does start 4 weeks before Christmas, right? 4 Sundays before December 25th, so usually sometime after Thanksgiving, the 1st of December-ish. But even though it is recent tradition to have 4 weeks of Advent, the more ancient tradition is that Advent closely mirrored Lent, meaning that it was somewhere between 40 days and 6 weeks that we celebrated or observed Advent. And as far as we can tell, that started shifting sometime in the 1200s to 4 weeks, with some churches, as particularly some Orthodox churches, continuing to observe 6 weeks of Advent from that time on. However, as Christmas has come hurtling at us, showing up in the stores before Halloween is even here yet, there are a number of churches that are returning to the practice of 6 weeks of Advent. Right? In a world where we can get almost anything with Amazon same-day or next-day delivery, some are opting into a time of holy waiting. In a time where we can get information with a quick Google search or a "Hey, Alexa," some are opting into a time of holy unknowing. And a time when frantic Christmas planning starts earlier and earlier, and the planning feels more intense between school parties, work parties, family parties, decorating, cooking, baking, traveling, gift buying, all of the planning that goes into Christmas. And some are opting into holy presence and holy patience. And last year, y'all called a pastor, a new associate pastor, who loves Advent. Like, people ask me my favorite season, and I will tell them Advent. So this year, you are opting in, whether or not you knew it, to 6 weeks of Advent, to a time of holy waiting, of holy unknowing, of holy presence and patience, and 6 weeks of just attempting to slow the pace a little bit in a season that can feel chaotic. We're going to try and make space this time for space on Sunday mornings and in our life groups to slow down, to breathe, to bask in the miracle that is the promise of Christ's coming, both 2,000 years ago and sometime in the present, or in the future. We're going to sit in the presence and hope of waiting. And this year we will do it all through 6 weeks of exploring a children's book. Please see the children's book, meaning not that but that it actually holds more depth than I think we often think children's literature holds. We're going to use this book called God's Holy Darkness, written by Cherie Green and Becca Selznick and illustrated by Nikki Faison. It's a book that is actually a deep, deep reminder of the beauty of God in all places and spaces. So to start, we're going to have a little bit of story time. I'm only going to read the opening pages because we'll get the rest of the book throughout this six-week series. But the opening pages say, darkness and blackness and night are too often compared to lightness and whiteness and day and found deficient. Let us name the beauty and goodness and holiness of darkness and blackness and night. So that is what we are going to do. Because often when we hear people talk about dark places or something having a dark feel to it, they mean that it is evil or bad or scary. And this can feel true, right? In dark places and spaces, it can be hard to see what is right in front of us and to see clearly, which just triggers a little bit of fear for us. But if we only ever see bad or evil or something to be afraid of in the dark, we miss out on the beauty that is to be found there. And this can be true not only for dark places and spaces, but without even thinking about it, it has implications for our relationships with people whose skin is darker than ours. This is not a condemnation of all things, all language around darkness, right? That language of darkness is biblical. We hear it in John that a light shines in the darkness and the darkness shall not overcome it. We hear Jesus refer to himself and his followers as light of the world. The psalmist talks about being in dark places of struggle and God's presence in that place. And there can be real danger in dark, right? There can be real danger in not being able to see clearly. There are places and people who have experienced real hurt in those places. So we're not seeking to minimize that. Excuse me. What I want to do is rather than condemn or make language something to be, let me start that sentence over again. What I want to do is invite us into paying attention to our language, to remember that the story we tell ourselves about something impacts how we view it. So if we only tell ourselves a story about good being light and dark being bad, we struggle to see anything else. As a side note, you will start to notice I have a thing for children's books and children's movies having more depth than I think we realize. So in the words of a wise tortoise from Kung Fu Panda, Master Oogway, he says, there is just news. There is no good or bad. It just is, and it is what we make of it. In the same way, there is no good or bad amount of light. There just is light or dark, whichever it is, and a balance that exists, and what we tell ourselves is what happens with it. So in a world where most of us have been taught some level of nyctophobia, or fear of the dark, we are going to take the next 6 weeks to explore the beauty that can only be found in darkness. That God's movement and holiness is found just as much in the dark as it is in the light. And we start with God's holy action in creation, the reminder that the entire biblical story starts in darkness. It starts in chaos and the face of the deep, right? And so we open with creation. Creation beginning in the dark. God uses darkness and blackness and night to show love for the world. Creation began in the dark. In the beginning, darkness covered the face of the deep, right? Those words we heard from Scripture today. God's poured out God's love and brought all things into being. Creation is God's work done in holy darkness. right? This reminder that in the beginning, creation is dark. Darkness covers the face of the deep, and God's Spirit, God's very breath, moves over creation, seeing potential for life and beauty and all that is. And then God calls forth light from darkness. Then God sets an order to them both, right? We hear in a few verses, God will name dark night and light day, giving both an importance and a place. God doesn't completely banish the dark, setting the sun in the sky for 24 hours. God doesn't see that light is good and that dark is bad. God simply brings forth something new and gives each its own space. There is time and beauty for both. And sometimes it feels like we have forgotten this. That in our attempt to mitigate our fear and be sure to see things at all times, we find ourselves surrounded by light. With street lights and bright overhead lights, I'm aware of this as these lights like shine down on my face, right? Like the glowing of our screens at night when we cannot sleep, the flashlights most of our phone contains, our life is overlighted, right? And it starts to mess with our bodies and our health. It disrupts our circadian rhythm, our natural knowing when we need sleep and rest, and when we are called to be active and moving. It misses out on our body's need for quiet, breathing space, for our bodies to heal and reconnect, to hear and to pay attention to our Creator and Maker in the quiet. On Friday, as I was prepping for this sermon, I was talking to a friend who did some of her college studies in Alaska, and she was there during the 24-hour daylight period. And she said it messed with everything she knew, because she would be out at friends and think they had a lot of time to stay out and play, only to look at her watch and find out it was 2 a.m. And her body did not know what to do with it. Our bodies need the natural cycle of light and dark. We cannot exist without both. And when we overlight our lives, we miss out on the beauty that can only be seen in the dark. Those small little lights, the fireflies, the stars in the sky. We miss out on the phases of the moon because our light is the same at night rather than being brought into small waxing and waning. Right? How many of you saw the moon on Friday night? It was huge. And if you live in a place where there is not all the street lights, you are acutely aware of that cycle. You're aware of the coolness that comes when the sun is no longer blazing down on you, the joy and the mystery of being surrounded by the dark and letting your other senses kick in to guide you and care for you. And sometimes we miss out and overlight our spiritual and faith journeys as well. In her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, author, prophetess, theologian Barbara Brown Taylor identifies 2 types of spirituality. One, she calls full solar spirituality. I tried to fix it. My bad. So what that says is full solar spirituality that's focused on being in the light of God at all times. Focused on being in the light of God at all times. This is the spirituality that focuses on the reward of seeing clearly. It focuses on being pure and holy. It's the spirituality that focuses on positivity, the way of seeing faith, and it's a way of seeing faith that struggles and challenges as a sign of lack of faith, right? Again, dark is bad. Darkness is punishment. But in contrast, Taylor identifies lunar spirituality, the reality that the seen or perceived presence of the divine light waxes and wanes, much like the moon. Lunar spirituality is based in a trust that God is active and moving even when we can't clearly see it. Right? Even when the light is hard to see, the activity and the presence is still there. The amount that we can see the moon does not change the moon's presence. It's neither good nor bad, but simply a part of reality of our people of faith, that there will be times when our faith feels bright and full of light and clarity and easy to see, And there will be times where it is harder to see a way forward, harder to see God's presence, harder to see what is in front of us. But none of that changes the reality of God's presence, of God's action, of God's movement, of God's faithfulness. In continuing this, Taylor points to the fact that when we talk about wise people or people who know a lot, we talk about them being enlightened, right? That they have seen a light, that their vision has changed, that they can see new things, but that we don't ever talk about endarkened people or endarkenment, or the people who live and embrace the mystery. The people who remember and know that we as humans have a limited amount of knowledge and ability to see, and there is beauty in that. In doing so, she points to a quote from St. Augustine of Hippo, an early bishop of the church, who said, "If you think you have understood, what you have understood is not God. If you think you have understood, what you have understood is not God." We, as a people of God, as a people of faith, cannot possibly wrap our minds around God's presence, around God's bigness, around God's mystery. So God's holy darkness invites us back into a time of endarkenment, of back into the mystery, the not knowing, the possibility of creation, the possibility that we cannot see all the things and need to rest in that mystery. Last Sunday, I was not in church with y'all. I was in rural South Dakota with a group of women pastors and a bunch of Benedictine nuns. It is a hoot and a half to hang out with them. They are brutal at Scrabble, let me tell you. But during that time, because I was in rural South Dakota, I got to spend a lot of time watching the sunset and the sun come up. I got to spend a lot of time watching the stars, and for 10 days watching the phases of the moon as it got smaller and bigger. I got to be restored in the rhythm of creation, leaving my windows open at night to hear the songs of that night and the darkness. But during that time, one of my sisters in the group, an ELCA pastor who also happens to be a queer woman of color, Yolanda Denson Byers, shared again a phrase with us that she heard growing up in the Black church. Dark is tomb, but dark is also womb. Dark is tomb, but dark is also womb. Yes, sometimes the darkness can feel like the tomb. It can feel like death and defeat. It can feel scary, but here's the thing about being an Easter people. We know that tomb is also the place of new birth and new life. It is the place of womb, a place of new life and growing, of being held in the comfort of a creator who is growing us into something new. Because God's holy darkness reminds us creation is in fact God's work done in darkness. And that darkness is good and holy and beautiful. Right? From the depths of the oceans with more species than our human brains can understand or discover, to the limitlessness of our galaxies that we cannot even reach the edges of in our imagination. Darkness is there and beautiful, a reminder of God's expanse and goodness and grace. God's work of creating is done in places where we cannot always see clearly, where we reach the limits of our human knowing. God's work is done in darkness, where we are formed and born out of places that may feel scary, because birth often means the death of something we knew. New life means the death of something we knew, that while it may feel like tomb because something has gone away, it is also womb because it means there is new life coming, life we cannot yet see. So as we begin 6 weeks of Advent, I invite you into a time of endarkenment, a time to returning to the mystery of God, to knowing the peace of holy anticipation and holy unknowing, of holy presence and holy patience, of settling in to God's holy darkness. And all of God's people said, Amen. I invite you to stand and join us in singing.
The heights, to the depths of the sea. Creation's revealing your majesty. From the colors of fall to the fragrance of spring. Every creature unique in the song that it sings. All exclaiming, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable. Awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim. You are amazing, God, who has told every lightning bolt where it should go, or seen heavenly storehouses laden with snow, who imagined the sun and gives source to its light, yet conceals it to bring us the coolness of night. None can fathom, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim. You are amazing, God. You are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable. You see the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable. You see the depth of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing.